Jake thought a weekend at the lake would fix everything. He and Mia had been dating nearly a year, but things had felt off lately. She was quieter, distant sometimes, like she was always listening for something he couldn't hear. So when he found the old cabin online, remote, cheap, sitting on the edge of a dark, still lake, he thought it was perfect. No neighbors, no signal, no distractions, he'd said on the drive up. Mia had just smiled faintly and kept looking out the window at the passing trees. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun had vanished behind the pines, and the gravel road had turned into a narrow trail. The place looked old but solid. 2 stories, wood siding faded gray by the wind, a wraparound porch with a single lantern swaying in the breeze. When Jake pushed the door open, the hinges groaned like the house hadn't been opened in years. Inside, it smelled of dust and lake water. But Mia said softly, "It's perfect." That night, they cooked dinner on the old stove, sat on the porch, and watched the moon rise over the black water. It was so quiet, Jake swore he could hear his own pulse in his ears. Sometime after midnight, Jake woke up cold. The fire in the stove had burned down to embers. Mia wasn't in bed. He found her outside, standing barefoot at the edge of the dock, her white nightgown clinging to her legs in the wind. She was staring across the lake. "Mia?" he called softly. She didn't answer. When he touched her shoulder, she flinched violently, eyes wide like she hadn't known he was there. "I thought I heard someone," she whispered. Jake looked across the water. Nothing but dark trees. No lights, no cabins, just stillness. They went back to bed, but Jake lay awake for hours, listening to the wind moaning in the trees, wondering what she had heard. The next morning he saw them, leading from the shore toward the cabin door. Bare footprints, larger than Mia's, too large. Mia swore she hadn't seen anyone. "Maybe an animal," she said, but her voice was tight, her eyes darting back toward the lake. That afternoon, Jake suggested leaving early. Mia only shook her head. "Let's stay one more night," she said softly. They locked the door this time, bolted the windows. But at 3:15 a.m., Jake woke to the sound of water slapping softly against the dock. Through the window, he saw her again, Mia, standing on the dock, staring across the lake. But this time she was whispering. Jake stepped outside slowly, his breath fogging in the cold. The boards of the dock creaked under his feet. "Mia," he said. She turned too quickly, eyes wide, startled again like she hadn't known he was there. "I told you," she whispered, "someone's out there." The next morning, more footprints, coming out of the lake, leading toward the cabin. That evening, as the sun sank red behind the trees, Jake saw it. Movement across the water, a shape, tall, standing just inside the tree line. He told Mia. She only said, "I know." That night at 3:15 a.m., Jake woke to the front door creaking open. Mia wasn't in bed. He grabbed the lantern and followed her to the dock. She was standing at the edge again, but she wasn't alone. A man stood beside her. Tall, thin, skin pale as the moon. "Mia," Jake shouted, running toward them. Both turned at the same time, slowly, and both faces were Mia's. Identical, smiling. The lake swallowed them before Jake could reach the edge. When police came the next day, they found Jake's car still in the driveway. The front door open. 2 sets of wet footprints leading inside. One set was small. The other wasn't. No one ever found Jake or Mia. Ryan and Lily had been together for 3 years when they finally decided to move in together. They'd toured dozens of apartments before finding the one on East Alder Street. It wasn't perfect, an old building with faded wallpaper in the halls and neighbors who never seemed to smile back. But it was affordable and surprisingly big for the price. The landlord said the previous tenant left in a hurry for personal reasons. Ryan thought nothing of it. Lily frowned but signed the lease anyway. The first week felt like a fresh start. Late night pizza on the floor because the dining table hadn't arrived yet. Watching movies on Ryan's laptop because the Wi-Fi wasn't set up. Every night they fell asleep to the hum of the old radiator, listening to the creaks and groans of a building that felt like it was exhaling around them. But Ryan started noticing something about Lily. She seemed tired, distracted, like she wasn't fully present. One night around 3:17 a.m., Ryan woke to find her sitting up in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the corner near the closet door. She didn't move when he whispered her name. Didn't even blink. Finally, she said softly, "I thought I heard someone talking." Ryan listened. Only the building settling, the faint hum of the radiator. He told her she was dreaming, but she didn't look convinced. The next few nights it happened again. Same time, 3:17 a.m. Ryan waking to find Lily upright, head tilted toward the corner like she was listening. Once he swore he heard her murmuring under her breath, too faint to make out. When he touched her arm, she flinched hard, like she didn't even realize he was there. Then blinked rapidly and said she must have been half asleep. But Ryan could feel it. Something wasn't right. A few nights later, Ryan woke to the sound of the closet door creaking. He turned slowly. Lily was sitting on the bed, eyes locked on the dark gap in the door. "Lily," he whispered, "what are you looking at?" She didn't answer at first. Then she said softly, "The man in the closet." Ryan turned on the lamp. The closet was empty. When he looked back, Lily was blinking in confusion like she didn't remember speaking. She asked why the light was on. After that night, the apartment felt different. Colder somehow. Shadows in the corners seemed darker than they should be. Lily stopped eating much. Stopped laughing at his jokes. Sometimes Ryan would find her standing at the window late at night, staring down at the street like she was waiting for someone. He started locking the closet door before bed. But every morning it was open again. Ryan decided to set up his phone to record while they slept. The next morning he listened to the audio. At 3:17 a.m. he heard whispering. Faint. Too faint to make out words, but not Lily's voice. Deeper. Male. Then came the breathing. Slow. Steady. Right next to the microphone. When Ryan checked the video, his chest went cold. At 3:19 a.m., the closet door opened slowly on its own. And for a split second, there was a shape in the dark gap. Tall. Still, Ryan didn't tell Lily what he found. He didn't want to scare her. But he started sleeping with the lamp on. The final night, Ryan woke to whispering again. He turned slowly. Lily wasn't in bed. She was standing beside the closet. The locked door was open. She whispered softly, "You can come out now." Something stepped out of the darkness. Ryan grabbed the lamp switch. The bulb burst with a pop, plunging the room into darkness. Glass rained onto the floor. In the faint glow from the streetlight outside, Ryan saw the shape. Tall, thin, one hand dragging along the wall as it moved. Too many fingers stretching unnaturally long. Lily turned toward Ryan slowly, smiling. The last thing the phone recorded was Ryan shouting her name before the screen went black. When police entered the apartment the next day, it was empty. The closet door was open, and scratched deep into the wood were the words, "He lives here now." Liam and Sarah had been together for almost 2 years when she started complaining about the man outside her window. It was always the same description. Tall, standing in the shadows just beyond the glow of the streetlight. She said he never moved, never spoke, just watched. The first time it happened, Liam thought she was dreaming. He rolled over, half asleep, and told her it was just the wind. But Sarah wouldn't let it go. She kept staring out the window like she was waiting for something to happen. The next morning, she swore she'd seen him again, standing at the edge of the yard around 3 a.m., tall and thin, head tilted toward the house. Liam tried to laugh it off, but he caught her checking the window 3 times that evening before bed. By the third night, Sarah wouldn't sleep. "Just look," she whispered at 2:55 a.m., shaking Liam awake. Outside, the yard was empty, but Sarah kept staring at the far corner, where the shadows pooled under the maple tree. "He's there," she insisted. "He's been there every night." So Liam set up his old camera on the windowsill, pointing toward the yard. "If someone's out there," he said, "we'll see them in the morning." Sarah nodded but didn't look away from the glass. The next morning, Liam checked the camera. Most of the night was boring, a few cars passing, tree branches shifting in the wind. Then at 3:12 a.m., the motion sensor activated. A man stood under the streetlight. Tall, thin, head tilted. He stayed there for 47 minutes without moving once. At 3:59 a.m., Sarah walked into frame. She stood at the window, staring out at him. And then she smiled. Not at the camera. At him. Liam paused the footage. "Sarah, why were you smiling?" he asked slowly. She frowned at the screen like she didn't understand the question. "I don't remember going to the window," she whispered. Liam decided to stay awake. He sat by the window, phone in hand, waiting. At 3:10 a.m., movement near the tree line caught his eye. The man was there. Closer this time, still watching. "Hey!" Liam shouted out the window. The figure didn't move, didn't even flinch. At 3:15 a.m., Liam heard the front door unlocking. Sarah was gone from the bed. He ran downstairs. She was opening the door, moving like she was half asleep. "Sarah, stop!" Liam grabbed her arm. She turned toward him slowly. "Don't wake him," she whispered. "Who?" Liam demanded. She pointed toward the window. The man was gone. The break-in. The next night, Liam locked every door, checked every window twice. Sarah watched the yard nervously until she finally fell asleep near midnight. At 3:17 a.m., the camera light turned on by itself. Liam grabbed his phone, heart pounding, and checked the feed. The man wasn't in the yard anymore. He was inside the house, standing at the end of the hallway. The camera went dark. When police entered the house the next day, they found the front door wide open. Liam's phone lay on the floor. The screen cracked, the last video frozen on a single frame. Sarah, standing in the hallway, smiling at someone just out of view. And behind her, a tall, thin shadow with a tilted head. Scratched into the paint on the wall beside the window were the words, "You let me in." Ethan had always admired how quiet Claire was. When they met, he thought it was calming, how she never raised her voice, how she listened more than she spoke. But after they moved into the old house on Fairview Street, her silence began to feel heavier. Like she wasn't just quiet, like she was listening to something he couldn't hear. The house was bigger than they needed. 2 floors, narrow hallways, a backyard full of maple trees. The real estate agent had laughed about the strange old wallpaper in the upstairs hall and the attic door that wouldn't open. Ethan and Claire laughed too. It felt like an adventure. At first, everything was normal. They painted the living room, argued about where to put the couch, ordered takeout while boxes sat unopened in every corner. But by the second week, Ethan noticed things about Claire. She was speaking less. She stopped humming while she cooked. Sometimes when he came home from work, she would be sitting in the living room with the lights off, staring at the wall like she was waiting for something. When he asked if she was okay, she always smiled and said she was fine. But she spoke less every day. One night, Ethan woke up thirsty. The house was silent as he made his way downstairs. Then he saw her. Claire was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark. No lights, no phone. her hands folded neatly in front of her. "Claire?" he whispered. She didn't look up. He stepped closer. Her lips were moving silently. "Claire," he said again, louder. She blinked at him slowly, surprised, like she hadn't realized he was there. "Did I wake you?" she asked softly. Ethan stared. "What were you doing?" She glanced at the empty chair across from her, then back at him. "Nothing," she said. That night, she didn't come back to bed until almost dawn. The next evening, Ethan heard her voice in the hallway. At first, he thought she was on the phone. But when he turned the corner, Claire was standing alone, facing the wall, lips moving. No sound came out. "Who are you talking to?" Ethan asked. Claire jumped like she hadn't heard him come in. "Just thinking out loud," she said quickly. But he was sure he'd heard another voice. That night, he stayed awake longer than usual. At 3:12 a.m., Claire got out of bed. He followed her down the stairs. She sat at the kitchen table again, lips moving silently. This time, Ethan stayed hidden and listened. She was whispering. And something with a low, rasping voice whispered back. Ethan turned on the light. The chair across from her was empty. Claire blinked at the sudden brightness. "You scared it," she said softly. The next day, Ethan set his phone to record while they slept. The following morning, he listened. At 3:14 a.m., the microphone picked up faint sounds. Whispering. Two voices. Claire's and something else. Low. Wrong. Speaking too slowly, like words pulled apart. When Ethan asked Claire about it, she didn't remember saying anything. But she looked pale when he mentioned the second voice, like she already knew. Over the next few nights, Claire's behavior changed. She didn't smile as much. Sometimes she stood at the upstairs window, staring at the yard like she was waiting for someone to arrive. She stopped eating dinner halfway through, setting her fork down mid-bite, head tilting slightly like she was listening to something far away. Ethan started hearing creaks in the floorboards at night. Not footsteps exactly, just the sound of weight shifting where no one was standing. He found words scratched faintly into the dust on the hallway windowsill. "We speak." He didn't tell Claire about it. Ethan decided to stay awake at the table with her. At 3:10 a.m., Claire came downstairs as if pulled by invisible strings. She sat in the chair opposite him. Her lips began to move. For a moment, only silence. Then a low, rasping voice answered from nowhere. Ethan felt the air turn cold. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded. The voice fell silent. Claire smiled faintly. "You'll hear it soon," she whispered. The overhead light flickered violently. The shadows in the corners stretched too long across the floor. Then, for the first time, Ethan heard the voice clearly. It spoke his name. The bulb popped overhead. The room fell into darkness. In the reflection of the window, Ethan saw a shape sitting in the chair across from her. Tall, bent too close to her, its hand on her shoulder. When the light came back on, the chair was empty. But Claire was smiling, eyes locked on Ethan now. She whispered, "It likes you." The next morning, Ethan woke at the table. Alone, Claire was gone. On the wall above the chair, written in ash, were the words, "It speaks through her now." Ethan never found her, but every night afterward at 3:14 a.m., the house filled with whispering voices. And sometimes one of them sounded like Claire. Tyler and Megan had been dating for 6 months when she finally invited him to her family home. It was the kind of old 2-story house you see in small towns, paint peeling on the siding, a porch swing that creaked in the wind, ivy climbing over the windows. Megan said her family had owned it for decades. When Tyler first walked in, he couldn't shake the feeling that the house was heavier than it looked from the outside. And there was one thing he noticed immediately. A door at the end of the hallway leading downstairs, locked with a thick rusted padlock. Over dinner, Tyler casually asked about the basement door. "Oh," Megan said quickly. "We don't use it much. It's damp down there, full of junk." She said it with a smile, but she didn't look him in the eye. That night, as Tyler lay in the guest room, he heard faint sounds below the floorboards. Not pipes, not wind. A slow, rhythmic scraping sound, like something being dragged across concrete. When he asked Megan the next morning, she just said, "Old house noises, you'll get used to it." But her smile was tighter this time. On the second night, Tyler stayed up late scrolling on his phone. Around 1:30 a.m., he heard it again, this time louder. Thump, thump, like something hitting wood. He stepped into the hall. The padlocked basement door rattled softly, as though someone, or something, had pushed against it from the other side. The next morning, Tyler noticed fresh scratches around the lock. Deep ones. Long ones. When he mentioned it, Megan shrugged quickly. "Must have been there before. My dad used to store tools down there." But she didn't sound sure. That night, Tyler woke to find Megan standing in the hallway, just staring at the basement door, not moving. When he called her name, she walked back to bed without answering. The third night, Tyler couldn't sleep. Every creak made his skin crawl. Sometime after midnight, he heard murmuring coming from below the floorboards. At first, he thought Megan was watching TV downstairs. But when he checked, the living room was dark. She was asleep on the couch. The voices were coming from below. He pressed his ear to the floor. One voice was hers. The other was deeper. Slower. Like something dragging each word out too long. The next evening, Megan told him she needed to grab something from the shed. But when Tyler glanced out the window, he saw her unlocking the basement door instead. She was carrying a candle. He followed her quietly. The old stairs groaned under his weight as he peered down into the basement. Megan stood in the center of the concrete floor. A white chalk circle had been drawn there, symbols scrawled around its edges. She placed the candle in the center and began to whisper. Something in the shadows answered. Tyler froze halfway down the stairs. He couldn't see its face, but a tall, thin shape moved along the far wall, staying just outside the candlelight. Its arms were too long. It crawled more than it walked. When Megan turned, eyes wide like she'd just noticed him, she hissed, "You shouldn't be here." The thing in the corner stopped moving, and then it slowly turned its head toward Tyler. Tyler didn't leave. He wanted to, but Megan kept saying, "It's under control." Except she was pale now, distracted. Sometimes she stared at the basement door for minutes without blinking. At night, Tyler started hearing scratching beneath the floor, then knocking, like someone tapping a slow rhythm from the other side. One morning, he found new words scratched into the wood of the basement door. "Almost free." Tyler stayed awake in the hallway. At 2:14 a.m., the basement door creaked open. Megan went downstairs carrying the candle again. Tyler followed with a flashlight. At the bottom of the stairs, he froze. Megan stood in the chalk circle, chanting softly, and behind her, the tall figure now stood upright, no longer hiding. Its head almost touched the low ceiling, hands resting on her shoulders. "Megan," Tyler whispered. She didn't turn. The figure did. Its face was pale, stretching too far when it smiled. The flashlight flickered and went out. When it came back on, Megan was gone. The figure was gone. Only the candle still burned on the floor. On the wall, scratched deep into the concrete, were the words, "She let me out." The next morning, Tyler packed his things. But when he reached the front door, it was already open, and muddy footprints led upstairs. Ben always teased his girlfriend Lily about how many selfies she took. It started as a little quirk when they first began dating. Morning coffee selfies, bathroom mirror shots, silly faces while waiting in line at the store. She filled her phone's memory with them. Ben thought it was cute at first, but after they moved in together, the habit became constant. Dozens of photos every single day. Different rooms, different outfits. Sometimes he'd wake up at night and see the faint flash of her phone camera from the other room. When he asked, she always said the same thing. Just one more picture. One night while Lily was showering, Ben borrowed her phone to look for a recipe she'd saved. Scrolling through her gallery, he saw it. A photo from earlier that afternoon, Lily in their living room smiling softly at the camera. And in the corner, near the hallway doorway, a figure. Tall, thin, completely still. Its face, as if it had one, was hidden in shadow. Ben blinked, thinking maybe it was a coat rack, a trick of the light. But they didn't own a coat rack, and the angle was wrong for a shadow. When Lily came out of the bathroom, hair damp, he asked casually, "Hey, was someone over today?" She shook her head. "No, just me." "Why?" Ben didn't mention the photo. Not yet. Over the next few days, Ben started noticing the figure in more of Lily's pictures, sometimes reflected in the window behind her, sometimes standing near a doorway, always in the edges, never in focus. He asked Lily if she saw it too. She looked at the photos and frowned. "I don't see anything," she said. She laughed after a moment, but it sounded nervous. That night, Ben checked her phone while she slept. The figure was in almost every photo from the past month. Sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but always watching her. A few nights later, while searching for a flashlight, Ben found an old photo album in the hallway closet. Dusty, yellowed pages, the kind families kept before everything went digital. He flipped through it on the couch while Lily cooked dinner. The photos were from years ago, birthdays, holidays, family trips, and in the background of several, half hidden in the trees or standing in a doorway, the same figure. It hadn't changed, not in over a decade. When Ben showed Lily, her face went pale. "These are from my parents' house," she whispered. She had never noticed the figure before. Ben couldn't shake it. He set up his phone to record their bedroom while they slept. The next morning, he watched the footage. At 3:16 a.m., Lily sat up in bed. She turned her head slowly toward the corner of the room. For several minutes, she just stared. Then faintly, the camera picked up movement. Something tall standing there, almost blending into the shadows. Ben paused the video, heart pounding. The figure's head tilted slightly toward Lily. When he asked her about it, she swore she didn't remember getting up at all. The next day, Ben scrolled through Lily's digital photos going back years. High school photos, family vacations, even pictures from when she was a child. The figure was there. At her 8th birthday party, standing near the fence in the background. At her college graduation, reflected faintly in a window behind the stage. On a family trip to the beach far down the shoreline, always watching her. It had been following her long before Ben met her. That night, Ben woke to the sound of Lily's phone camera clicking repeatedly. Flash, flash, flash. She was standing in the corner of the bedroom, phone held up, taking selfies in the dark. The screen glowed faintly, lighting her face between each picture. "Lily," he whispered. She didn't answer. She just kept smiling faintly at the camera. Click, click. When Ben reached for the phone, it slipped from her hand and landed face up on the floor. The last photo taken glowed on the screen. Lily was smiling. And standing right behind her, one hand on her shoulder, was the figure. No longer in the shadows. No longer distant. The police found the phone the next morning. The final photo was time-stamped 3:33 a.m. The house was empty. Ben and Lily were never found. On the bedroom wall, written in ash, were the words, "You see me now." Chris used to say Emily's laugh was the first thing that made him fall in love with her. It was warm, natural, the kind of laugh that made other people smile even if they didn't know why she was laughing. But after they moved into the old house on Hollow Creek Road, her laugh began to change. At first it was subtle, quieter, less frequent. Then it returned, louder now but at the strangest times. Moments when there was no reason to laugh at all. The first time Chris noticed it was a little after midnight. He woke to faint giggling downstairs. At first he smiled. Maybe Emily had stayed up watching one of those stand-up specials she loved. But when he went downstairs, the living room was dark. Emily was standing at the window, her back to him. "Em," Chris whispered. She didn't move. Her shoulders were shaking like she was laughing under her breath. Finally, she turned her head slightly toward him, not enough for him to see her whole face. "I thought I saw something funny," she said softly. Then she walked upstairs without another word. Chris stood in the dark living room for a long time, listening to the wind scrape branches against the siding. He didn't sleep well after that. The next evening, Chris stayed up late working on his laptop. Around 1:40 a.m., he heard it again. Emily's laugh. But this time it came from outside. Chris looked out the window. She was standing in the backyard near the tree line, facing the dark woods. The moonlight made her look almost colorless, a pale figure against the black trees. Her shoulders shook as she laughed at something only she could see. Chris ran outside, calling her name. She turned toward him slowly, her smile fading just a little. "There was a man," she said softly. "He was so funny." Chris looked at the trees. There was no one there. The next day, Chris set up his phone to record the living room overnight. The following morning, he watched the footage. At 1:43 a.m., Emily appeared on camera, standing in the dark near the window. She was laughing softly. After a few seconds, a second laugh joined hers. Deeper, male, close to the microphone. Chris replayed it 3 times. Emily didn't remember waking up at all. That evening, Chris visited the elderly woman who lived next door. He asked if she had ever seen anyone near the house at night. The woman hesitated before speaking. "This land used to be farmland," she said. "Belonged to a man named Walter Gray. He disappeared in 1978. People said he was strange, always laughing to himself." She lowered her voice. "They never found him, but folks say they still hear him at night out by the trees." Chris went home unsettled. Emily just smiled faintly when he told her the story, and then she laughed, softly, like she already knew. Chris stayed awake in bed watching her. At 1:44 a.m., Emily's eyes opened. She stared at the ceiling for a long time, then began giggling softly. "Em?" Chris whispered. She didn't respond. She just turned her head toward the open window and laughed louder. Chris turned on the lamp. For a split second, he saw a tall, thin shadow standing in the corner of the room. Then the light flickered violently and went out. When it came back on, the corner was empty. Emily was still smiling. Over the next week, Emily's behavior grew stranger. She started leaving the house at night without telling Chris. Once, he followed her down the block. She stood under a streetlight, head tilted back, laughing softly at the empty street. When he called her name, she turned slowly and said, "He tells the best jokes." Chris stopped sleeping. He started locking the windows, but every morning one was open. Chris set up cameras in every room. At 1:46 a.m., Emily rose from bed and walked downstairs. The front door was standing wide open. Chris followed, whispering her name. She turned toward him, face pale, eyes wide. And then she laughed. Long and sharp, a sound that didn't belong to her anymore. From the doorway, a second laugh joined hers. Low, male, close. Chris switched on the hallway light. For a split second, a tall figure stood beside her, head bent too far to one side. The light popped and went out. When it came back, the door was closed. Emily and the figure were gone. The next day, police reviewed the footage. The final video showed Chris frozen in the living room as Emily and the figure stood side by side in the doorway, laughing softly into the dark before the camera cut to static. Neither of them were ever found. On the living room wall, written in black ash, were the words, "He's still funny." If you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us. If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Night Fear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.